She felt a nervous excitement as she walked toward the small cafe where she was supposed to meet someone for a blind date. It wasn't the kind of nervousness that made her stomach twist painfully. Instead, it was a gentle flutter, a mixture of curiosity and hope, tinged with a little fear of the unknown. She had dressed simply but carefully, hoping to feel comfortable and confident at the same time. Music had always been her comfort, her safe place, and somehow, she felt it might help her through the unpredictability of meeting someone she had never seen before. The cafe looked familiar, cozy with soft lighting and a few tables scattered around, some occupied by quiet conversations and the clinking of coffee cups. There was a piano tucked into one corner, and she felt a small smile tug at her lips. Music had always been a part of her life, and seeing the piano there felt like a quiet invitation. She had played in cafes before, though never for someone she hadn't met. The thought made her both anxious and eager. He was already there when she arrived, sitting at a table near the window. He looked up from his notebook as she entered, and their eyes met for the first time. It wasn't an immediate spark, not in a dramatic sense, but there was something in the calmness of his gaze, a quiet curiosity that made her feel seen. He stood as she approached, offering a small, polite smile. "Hello," he said softly, his voice steady but warm. "I'm glad you could make it." "Hi," she replied, her voice slightly higher than usual, betraying her nervousness. "Me too, this place is nice." He gestured toward the piano. "Would you like to play something? It might make the meeting easier." She blinked, caught off guard by the suggestion. Play music on a first blind date? It was unusual, but the idea stirred a thrill in her chest. I could," she said slowly, unsure if it was too forward, but he didn't hesitate or judge. He simply smiled, encouraging her, and that gave her the courage to walk toward the piano. She sat on the bench, her fingers hovering above the keys for a moment, just feeling the cool touch of the piano beneath her hands. She closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath, letting the familiarity of the instrument calm her nerves. Music had a way of speaking when words failed, and she hoped it could convey some of the thoughts and feelings she hadn't yet found the courage to express. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost shy. But as her fingers moved with more confidence, a melody began to take shape, flowing naturally from her heart. She didn't know if he would like it, but she hoped he could feel the emotion behind each note, the curiosity, the gentle hope, and the subtle excitement that had brought her here. He watched her quietly, his eyes attentive and thoughtful, not interrupting, not judging, simply observing. She could feel that he was present, fully attentive, and it made the music feel alive in a way it rarely did for strangers. She played without thinking about perfection, letting her feelings guide each chord, each gentle rise and fall of the melody. As she played, she noticed the small details about him, the way his eyes softened at certain notes, the way he leaned forward slightly as if drawn into the music, and the way his hands rested lightly on the table, relaxed but alert. It was as if the music was forming a bridge between them, a quiet connection that neither words nor gestures could create. When she finally stopped, the cafe seemed quieter for a moment, as if the music had held its breath. He remained still, letting the last note linger before speaking. "That was beautiful," he said softly, his voice carrying a sincere awe. "I've never heard anything quite like that." Her cheeks warmed and she laughed lightly, a mixture of embarrassment and pleasure. "I just play what comes naturally," she said. "I don't always know how it will sound, but I hope it says something." "It does," he replied without hesitation. "It says a lot, more than I could put into words." They spent the next few minutes talking casually, sharing small pieces of their lives, their likes and dislikes, their favorite music, and the simple joys of daily life. She discovered that he had loved music for as long as he could remember, though he had never learned to play an instrument. Instead, he had always admired those who could bring notes to life, and he admitted that watching her play had been surprisingly moving. She, in turn, found herself opening up more than she expected, sharing stories from her childhood, moments that had shaped her, and the quiet joys and struggles she had experienced. There was an ease to their conversation, a natural rhythm that made the time pass quickly. For the first time in a blind date, she didn't feel the usual awkwardness or pressure. It was just two people connecting slowly, honestly, and genuinely. At one point, he asked her why she loved music so much. She paused, thinking carefully before answering. "It's like breathing," she said softly. "It's something I can't live without." It speaks to parts of me that words never reach. When I play, I feel free. And sometimes I think it's the only way I can truly express myself." He listened intently, nodding slightly, and she could see that he understood more than just the words. There was a quiet respect in his gaze, a curiosity and admiration that made her feel safe sharing herself. "I can see that," he said gently. "And I can feel it when you play. It's real, honest, and it matters." After a while, they returned to the piano, but this time it wasn't about impressing him or performing for him. It was about sharing a moment, a feeling, a piece of her heart. She played a melody she had composed herself, simple but full of emotion, letting the music carry what she could not yet say. As the melody flowed, she noticed a subtle shift in him. His posture relaxed, his eyes softened, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. She realized that the music had touched him, had opened a part of him that rarely showed itself, and that realization made her heart beat faster. The connection between them felt fragile yet profound, like a delicate thread being woven carefully through their shared experience. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment as if savoring the last note. Then he said, "That was incredible. I don't think I've ever experienced music like that before. It's alive somehow, and it feels like you've shared a part of yourself that's rare and beautiful." She felt a lump in her throat, a mix of pride, joy, and a little shyness. I'm glad you feel that," she said softly. "It's just what I feel. I hope it reaches people the way I feel it myself." "It does," he replied firmly. "It reaches me. And I think that's all anyone can hope for." For the rest of the afternoon, they continued talking, laughing, and sharing stories. She discovered that he had a quiet humor, a way of seeing the world with gentle curiosity, and a thoughtful approach to life. He noticed the little things about her, the way she laughed when she was nervous, the small gestures of her hands when she explained something, the soft way she would close her eyes when immersed in music. She in turn noticed how patient and attentive he was, how he listened not just to words but to feelings, and how his quiet confidence made her feel safe and understood. As the afternoon faded into evening, they decided to take a short walk. The air was cool and refreshing, carrying the faint scent of flowers from nearby planters and the distant hum of the city. They walked side by side, not touching, but the presence of the other was comforting, grounding, and familiar. Silence was easy between them, comfortable rather than awkward, filled with a quiet understanding that had begun to grow. At one point, he stopped and turned to her, looking thoughtful. "I wasn't sure what to expect today," he said softly. "A blind date can be awkward, forced. But this feels different." "You're different. And I like it. I like being around you." Her heart lifted at his words, a warmth spreading through her chest. "I feel the same," she said quietly. "I didn't expect to feel this way, but I do. And I'm glad it's real." They continued walking, talking about small ordinary things, the streets they liked, the kind of music they wanted to hear, and the simple moments that made life meaningful. Each shared story, each glance, each laugh strengthened the connection between them, making the afternoon feel like the beginning of something important, something rare. As they returned to the cafe, they felt a quiet satisfaction in the way the day had unfolded. It had been more than a blind date. It had been a meeting of hearts, a connection built on music, understanding, and shared moments. She realized that the first step had been playing a melody, but the true bond had formed in the small exchanges, the laughter, and the honest conversation that had followed. When they finally parted that evening, she felt a mix of excitement and calm. She had discovered someone who saw her, not just superficially but deeply through her music, her words, and her presence. And she knew quietly that this was only the beginning. As she walked home, she replayed the melodies in her mind, the sound of his voice and the feeling of connection that had grown in such a short time. She felt hopeful, curious, and a little nervous about what would come next, but for the first time in a long time, she felt something new and beautiful taking root. Music had brought them together, yes, but it was the honesty, the care, and the shared understanding that had begun to weave the invisible thread between their hearts. And for the first time, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of a story unfolding, one filled with music, laughter, shared moments, and the quiet joy of truly being seen. The next meeting felt different from the first. She arrived at the cafe with a quiet excitement, her steps lighter, her heart calmer yet still filled with anticipation. The memory of their first encounter lingered in her mind. The way he had listened to her play, the way his eyes had softened with each note, and the subtle smile that made her feel seen. She hoped today would hold a similar magic, but she also felt a small thrill at the thought of discovering something new about him, about herself, and about the connection that had begun. He was already there, sitting near the piano, his notebook set aside, a cup of coffee in hand. When he saw her, his expression brightened with a warmth that made her chest feel tight with happiness. It wasn't dramatic, but it was sincere, a quiet welcome that made her feel instantly comfortable. "Hi," he said softly, standing as she approached. "I'm glad you came." "Hi," she replied, smiling. "I'm glad too." They sat together for a few moments, sipping coffee and letting the silence stretch in a comfortable way. It wasn't awkward. Instead, it was peaceful, the kind of silence that suggested familiarity and understanding. She noticed little things about him, the way he tilted his head when thinking, the calm way he held his cup, and the quiet attentiveness that made her feel valued and appreciated. Finally, he gestured toward the piano. "Would you like to play again?" he asked. "If you feel like it." She nodded, a small thrill running through her. The piano had become more than an instrument today. It was a way to communicate, to express emotions that words couldn't fully capture. She moved toward it, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys, feeling the cool surface beneath her touch. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing a deep breath, letting herself sink into the comfort and familiarity of the music. The first notes were soft, tentative, almost shy, but as she continued, the melody grew, flowing with a natural rhythm. She didn't think about impressing him or making a statement. She simply let her emotions guide her, letting curiosity, hope, and subtle excitement shape each chord. The cafe seemed to fade away around her, leaving only the music, the piano, and the quiet presence of the man who was listening so intently. He watched quietly, his gaze soft but focused, as if he were absorbing not just the sound but the emotion behind it. She felt a thrill at the realization that the music had become a bridge, connecting them in a way that words alone could not. Every note she played seemed to open a tiny window into her heart, and she sensed that he was peering inside, not intrusively, but with gentle care. As the song continued, she noticed subtle changes in him. His posture relaxed, his shoulders dropped from their usual quiet tension, and his hands rested lightly on the table, almost as if he were swaying gently with the music. The connection felt fragile yet undeniable, like a thread being carefully woven between them. She played with more confidence now, allowing herself to feel the joy and curiosity that had first led her to the piano. When the final note lingered in the air, he remained still for a moment, letting it resonate between them. Then he spoke, his voice low and sincere. "That was incredible," he said. "You have a way of playing that makes everything else disappear. I can feel everything you're feeling, and it's powerful." She felt a blush rise to her cheeks, a mixture of pride and humility. "I just play what I feel," she said softly. "I hope it reaches people in some way." "It reaches me," he replied firmly. "More than I expected. I didn't know music could speak like that, but you've shown me it can." They talked for a while after that, letting conversation flow naturally, without pretense or awkwardness. He asked her about the inspiration behind her melodies, the moments that had shaped her love for music and the memories she held dear. She spoke openly, sharing stories from her childhood, small victories, and quiet struggles. He listened attentively, occasionally asking questions that showed genuine curiosity and care, the kind of attention that made her feel truly seen. She discovered that he had a gentle humor, a thoughtful perspective on life, and a quiet way of appreciating the world around him. He noticed little things about her, the way she smiled when she spoke about music, the small movements of her hands when she was nervous, the softness in her voice when she described something meaningful. It was the kind of observation that didn't feel intrusive but made her feel valued and appreciated. At one point, he shared something personal. "I've always admired people who can express themselves," he said quietly. "I've never been able to do that in the same way. Music, it's a gift, and watching you, listening to you, it's like I'm experiencing it through you. And it's beautiful." Her heart warmed at his words. She realized that this connection, this shared understanding, was growing stronger with each meeting. It wasn't about appearances, charm, or superficial conversation. It was about honesty, vulnerability, and the way music could convey what words sometimes could not. They played a small game with the piano afterward. He would hum a tune and she would try to follow it on the keys, improvising and letting the melody shift as it pleased. They laughed as she exaggerated certain notes or added unexpected twists. And he laughed with her, a soft, genuine sound that made her feel lighter than she had in years. The piano had become not just a medium for music, but a space for connection, laughter, and shared discovery. Afterward, they took a walk outside, enjoying the warmth of the afternoon sun and the quiet rhythm of the streets. They spoke about ordinary things, favorite cafes, books, movies, and songs they loved. But each conversation felt more intimate than it seemed. She realized that the depth of understanding didn't always come from grand gestures or dramatic statements. Sometimes it came from listening, sharing small details, and being fully present with another person. As they walked, he paused and looked at her thoughtfully. "I didn't expect a blind date to feel like this," he admitted softly. "I thought it would be awkward, maybe forced, but with you, it's different. I feel understood, seen, and that's rare." She felt a quiet joy spread through her chest. "I feel the same," she said softly. "I didn't expect it either, but being with you, even like this, it feels natural, comfortable, real." They continued walking, talking, and laughing, but the atmosphere shifted subtly. There was a quiet tension, not of anxiety, but of anticipation, of knowing that something meaningful was beginning to form. The connection between them had grown beyond casual curiosity. It was forming into something rare, a bond that was delicate yet strong, rooted in shared moments, honesty, and the language of music. When they returned to the cafe, the sun had started to dip lower in the sky, casting golden light across the room. She sat at the piano once more, not out of obligation, but because it had become a way to share herself in a meaningful way. She played a melody that was softer, slower, filled with warmth and gentle hope. He listened quietly, absorbed in the music, and she felt a quiet thrill knowing that each note seemed to resonate with him. When she finally stopped, he remained still for a moment, savoring the sound. "You have a gift," he said softly. "Not just the ability to play, but the ability to make someone feel something. I didn't know music could touch me like this, but you've shown me it can." She smiled a little shyly, feeling a mixture of pride and vulnerability. "I play from the heart," she said quietly. "I don't always know what will come out, but I'm glad it reaches you." "It reaches me more than you know," he replied. "And I think this is just the beginning. There's something here, something worth exploring." As the evening drew near, they sat together in quiet conversation, sharing reflections on the day, small stories, and moments that mattered to them. The cafe had become more than a meeting place. It was a space for connection, understanding, and the subtle magic of shared experiences. She realized that the bond forming between them wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It was about honesty, care, and the small, meaningful moments that built trust and intimacy. When it was time to leave, they walked out together into the cool evening air. The streets were calm, and the city lights reflected softly in the pavement. They didn't rush or try to fill the silence with words. Instead, they walked side by side, letting the quiet presence of the other be enough. Before parting, he turned to her with a gentle smile. "I'm glad we met," he said softly, "and I hope we can continue this, exploring, learning, and sharing, together." She felt a warmth in her chest, a quiet excitement that made her heart lift. "I hope so too," she said softly. "I've never felt a connection like this before, and I want to see where it leads." As she walked home that evening, she thought about the music, the laughter, and the quiet moments of understanding they had shared. She felt hopeful, curious, and excited for the next meeting. Music had brought them together, yes, but it was the honesty, care, and connection that had created something far deeper than either of them had expected. She smiled to herself, realizing that this story, this quiet, unfolding bond, was only beginning. And for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to let herself be open, vulnerable, and fully present, knowing that someone truly saw her, not just for her music, but for the person she was. The next meeting felt like a gentle continuation of something that had already begun to grow between them. She arrived at the cafe, feeling a mixture of excitement and calm, as if the familiarity of the space and the piano gave her both comfort and courage. Today she wasn't just going to play for him. She wanted to share a part of herself in a way she hadn't before, letting the music and conversation unfold naturally. He was already there, seated near the piano, glancing up when she walked in. His smile was soft, warm, and welcoming, and it made her chest feel light. There was no need for awkward introductions or forced small talk. They simply acknowledged each other, letting the silence carry the familiarity and the unspoken understanding that had begun to form. "Hi," he said quietly, rising slightly as she approached. "I'm glad you came." "Hi," she replied, smiling. "I've been looking forward to it." They sat together for a while, sipping their drinks, sharing casual observations about the day. But the conversation soon deepened, as if both of them were intentionally moving past the surface, eager to understand each other more fully. She asked him about his favorite memories, the simple joys that had stayed with him, and the experiences that had shaped who he was. He listened carefully, then shared stories of his own, not boasting or showing off, but revealing his life in a sincere and honest way. There was a quiet rhythm to their conversation, a gentle ebb and flow that felt effortless. They laughed at shared jokes and smiled at little coincidences in their stories. She noticed how attentive he was, the subtle way he leaned in when she spoke, and how his eyes reflected a genuine interest rather than casual curiosity. It made her feel safe, valued, and understood in a way that was rare and refreshing. After some time, he suggested she play at the piano. She hesitated for a moment, feeling a mix of excitement and nervousness. The first meeting had been magical, but now she felt a gentle pressure to express something even deeper. Yet she trusted the connection that had grown between them, and she moved toward the piano with a quiet confidence. As her fingers touched the keys, she let herself sink into the music. The first notes were gentle, delicate, almost like a question being asked. She allowed the melody to develop naturally, letting her emotions guide each chord. Today the music was more personal, reflecting not just her feelings but the curiosity, hope, and tentative trust she felt toward him. He watched quietly, his gaze soft and encouraging, as if he were not merely observing the music, but listening to the emotions behind it. Each note seemed to speak a little more about her, revealing layers of thought, memory, and feeling. She played freely, improvising, allowing the music to breathe and expand, and she noticed subtle changes in him. His posture relaxed, a faint smile appeared on his lips, and his eyes followed the flow of her hands with a quiet admiration. When the final note lingered in the air, there was a brief silence, a moment to absorb what had just passed between them. Then he spoke softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "That was beautiful," he said. "It's like you're telling a story without words, and somehow it reaches me in a way I didn't expect." Her heart lifted at his words. "I just play what I feel," she replied, a small smile on her lips. "I hope it speaks in a way that makes sense to others." "It does," he said firmly, "and it tells me more about you than words ever could. There's something honest in it, something that feels real." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of conversation, music, and quiet observation. They discovered new shared interests, small details that connected them in ways neither of them had anticipated. He mentioned a book he had loved recently, and she found herself intrigued by his perspective. She shared a story from her childhood, and he listened with quiet empathy, asking thoughtful questions that made her feel truly seen. They laughed often, not at forced jokes but at the little absurdities of life, the unexpected coincidences, and the moments that reminded them both of how human and imperfect life could be. Each laugh, each smile, each gentle glance seemed to strengthen the connection between them, building a foundation of trust and mutual understanding. At one point, he leaned back slightly and said, "I didn't expect to feel so comfortable with someone on a blind date. I thought it would be awkward, maybe tense, but with you, it feels natural. Like we've known each other longer than we have." She nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. "I feel the same," she said quietly. "It's rare to feel such ease with someone so quickly. I wasn't expecting it, but I'm glad it happened." They decided to take a short walk, letting the afternoon air and soft sunlight add to the calmness of their time together. They didn't rush or try to fill every pause with words. The comfortable silence, the gentle rhythm of walking side by side, and the occasional laughter felt like another layer of connection. As they walked, he shared a personal story about a challenge he had faced, something he rarely talked about. She listened with quiet attention, offering empathy without judgment. He noticed the way she nodded thoughtfully, the softness in her voice and the careful questions she asked. It made him feel understood and respected, something he didn't often experience with others. "You really listen," he said quietly, after a moment of reflection. "I don't mean just hearing words, but understanding them. And understanding me. It's rare, and it matters." She smiled softly, touched by his words. "I try," she said. "I believe listening is one of the kindest things we can offer. And I want to understand you, not just hear you." When they returned to the cafe, the sunlight had softened, casting a golden glow across the room. She felt a quiet comfort in returning to the piano. But this time, she played not just to share her feelings, but to invite him into her world, to let him experience the emotions and stories that shaped her. The music flowed more freely, confident, warm, and full of life. He listened, absorbed in the melody, and she noticed his subtle reactions, the way his eyes softened, the faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, and the quiet appreciation in his posture. She realized that music had become a language between them, a way to communicate emotions that words alone could not carry. When she finished playing, he remained still for a moment, as if savoring the last note. "I don't know how to describe it," he said softly. "It's like, I can feel what you're feeling. It's real, honest, and it matters." She felt a rush of warmth, a quiet sense of pride, and an emotional connection that went deeper than she had anticipated. "I'm glad it reaches you," she said softly. "It means a lot that you can feel it." They continued talking into the evening, their conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic. They discovered more commonalities, shared dreams, and hopes for the future. She noticed the subtle ways he showed care, the gentle tone of his voice, the way he asked questions thoughtfully, the quiet patience in his manner. It made her feel seen, appreciated, and valued, deepening the bond between them. At one point he paused, looking at her thoughtfully. "I didn't expect to find this on a blind date," he said softly. "I wasn't looking for anything serious, but something about you. It's different. I feel connected, and I want to see where this goes." Her heart lifted at his words. She had hoped he felt the same connection she did, and hearing him voice it aloud made everything feel real and tangible. "I feel the same," she said softly. "It's rare, but it feels right, and I want to see where it goes too." As the evening drew to a close, they lingered for a while, savoring the quiet moments together. The cafe had become more than a meeting place. It was a space of trust, understanding, and growing connection. She realized that this relationship, though new, was rooted in sincerity, empathy, and shared experiences that went beyond the ordinary. Before leaving, he gently took her hand, a simple gesture filled with meaning. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for the music, but for being yourself. For sharing your heart. I feel lucky to have met you." She smiled, her chest warm with emotion. "I feel the same," she replied. "Meeting you has been unexpected but wonderful. I'm grateful for it." As she walked home, she reflected on the day, the music, the laughter, the quiet moments of understanding, and the subtle way their connection had deepened. She felt hopeful, excited, and a quiet certainty that this was only the beginning. Music had brought them together, but it was the honesty, care, and shared understanding that had created something far more meaningful. Sitting at home later, she thought about the melodies she had played, the way his presence had influenced her, and the small details that had made the day so special. She realized that connection didn't have to be rushed or dramatic. It could grow slowly, naturally, like a melody unfolding, each note building on the last to create something beautiful, lasting and real. And in that quiet reflection, she allowed herself to imagine the possibilities of what could come next. The bond they were building was rare, delicate, and profound, and she felt ready to embrace it fully, letting the music, conversation, and shared moments guide them forward. The next meeting carried a quiet sense of anticipation. She walked toward the cafe with a soft excitement that felt different from before. It was no longer the nervous curiosity of a first encounter or the cautious hope of the second meeting. This time it was a gentle certainty, a feeling that something meaningful was beginning to grow between them. She had learned to trust the rhythm of their connection, to follow the subtle cues that spoke louder than words, and to let the music guide her emotions. When she arrived, he was already there, seated near the piano with a calm, focused expression. He looked up and smiled, and the warmth in his eyes made her chest swell with quiet happiness. It was a smile that had become familiar, a small reassurance that whatever happened today they would meet each other honestly, with curiosity and care. "Hi," he said softly, standing as she approached. "It's good to see you again." "Hi," she replied, smiling. "It's good to see you too." They sat together and talked for a few minutes, sharing small observations about the day. The cafe was quieter than usual, with only a few patrons scattered across the tables, leaving space for conversation and gentle music. The sunlight fell softly through the windows, illuminating the piano in the corner and casting warm tones across the room. She felt a sense of calm, as if the setting itself encouraged honesty and connection. After a few moments, he gestured toward the piano. "Would you like to play today?" he asked, his voice gentle but filled with expectation. She nodded, a small thrill running through her chest. She moved to the piano, letting her fingers hover above the keys for a moment. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the familiar coolness beneath her hands. Today, the music wasn't just about sharing feelings. It was about understanding, connecting, and exploring a bond that was growing stronger with each encounter. The first notes were delicate, almost hesitant, but as she continued, the melody unfolded naturally, carrying the emotions she could not fully express in words. There was a softness in her playing, a sense of longing, hope, and quiet joy that seemed to fill the room. She noticed the way he watched her, his eyes reflecting the subtle changes in her music, the rise and fall of the melody, and the emotion that lingered between the notes. He listened with an attentiveness that felt profound. It wasn't just the music that captivated him. It was the honesty behind it, the vulnerability that she allowed herself to show. He leaned forward slightly, absorbed, his expression a mixture of admiration and quiet awe. For a moment it felt as though the cafe, the people, and the world beyond had disappeared, leaving only the piano, the music, and the connection forming between them. As the melody grew, she allowed herself to play more freely, letting her emotions guide each chord and phrase. There was a subtle story in the music, a reflection of the curiosity, hope, and trust she felt toward him. She didn't play for perfection or to impress him. She played to reveal herself, to invite him into her world, and to share a part of her heart that words could not reach. When the final note lingered, he remained still for a moment, letting it resonate. Then he spoke softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "That was amazing. You make the music feel alive. I can feel the emotions you're sharing, and it's powerful." Her cheeks warmed at his words. "I just play what I feel," she said quietly. "I hope it reaches others in some way." "It reaches me," he replied, his voice firm yet gentle. "And it tells me more about you than words ever could. There's something real in it, something honest and beautiful." After the music, they sat together talking about their experiences, their dreams, and the small details of life that mattered to them. She discovered more about him, the quiet moments he cherished, the challenges he had faced, and the passions he pursued quietly. He in turn noticed more about her, the way her eyes sparkled when she talked about something she loved, the gentle gestures of her hands, and the subtle way she expressed herself when she was comfortable. They laughed often, not at forced jokes but at shared observations and little surprises of life. Each laugh seemed to build trust, and each smile strengthened the bond that had formed. She realized that connection wasn't always about dramatic moments or grand gestures. It could grow slowly, naturally, through simple conversations, shared laughter, and the quiet understanding of another person's presence. At one point he paused and looked at her thoughtfully. "I didn't expect to feel so comfortable with someone on a blind date," he said softly. "It usually feels awkward or rushed, but with you, it feels natural, like we've known each other longer than we have." She felt a warmth spread through her chest. "I feel the same," she said quietly. "It's rare to feel such ease with someone so quickly, but it feels right." They decided to take a short walk outside, letting the gentle afternoon air and the quiet rhythm of the streets add to the calmness of their time together. They didn't rush or feel the need to fill every pause with words. The comfortable silence, the occasional laughter, and the soft sounds of the city became part of the rhythm of their growing connection. As they walked, he shared a story about a challenge he had faced, something personal he rarely mentioned. She listened attentively, offering empathy without judgment. He noticed the way she engaged with care, the subtle encouragement in her questions and the gentle understanding in her expressions. It made him feel seen, respected, and valued in a way he hadn't often experienced. "You really listen," he said quietly after a pause. "I mean, you really hear and understand me." "That's rare, and it matters more than I can say." She smiled softly, touched by his words. "I try," she replied. "Listening is one of the kindest things we can offer. I want to understand you, not just hear you." When they returned to the cafe, the light had softened, casting warm shadows across the room. She sat at the piano once more, feeling a quiet determination to express herself fully, to let the music convey the emotions she couldn't yet say aloud. The melody that emerged was gentle, flowing, and filled with warmth and hope. It carried curiosity, trust, and the subtle anticipation of what their growing connection could become. He listened intently, absorbed in the music. She noticed the subtle changes in him, the relaxed posture, the faint smile, the quiet admiration in his eyes. Music had become a language between them, a way to communicate feelings that words could not. Each note strengthened their bond. Each phrase deepened their understanding of each other. When she finished, he remained quiet for a moment, savoring the last note. "You have a gift," he said softly. "Not just the music, but the ability to make someone feel something. I've never experienced music like this before, and it's moving." She felt a rush of warmth and pride. "I play from my heart," she said quietly. "I don't always know how it will sound, but I'm glad it reaches you." "It reaches me more than you know," he said. "And I feel this connection growing. There's something rare here, something worth exploring." They spent the remainder of the afternoon talking, sharing small joys, personal stories, and reflections on life. She noticed the subtle ways he expressed care, the gentle tone, the thoughtful questions, and the quiet patience that made her feel valued. Each shared story, each glance, each moment of understanding strengthened their bond. At one point, he paused and said softly, "I wasn't expecting to feel this on a blind date. I thought it would be awkward, but with you it feels different. I feel connected, and I want to see where this goes." Her heart lifted at his words. She had hoped he felt the same connection she did, and hearing it spoken aloud made everything feel tangible. "I feel the same," she replied softly. "It's rare, but it feels right, and I want to see where it goes too." As evening approached, they lingered, savoring the quiet moments together. The cafe had become more than a meeting place. It was a space for trust, understanding, and growing intimacy. She realized that this relationship, though still new, was rooted in sincerity, empathy, and shared experiences that went beyond the ordinary. Before parting, he gently took her hand, a simple gesture filled with meaning. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for the music, but for being yourself. For sharing your heart. I feel lucky to have met you." She smiled, feeling warmth and gratitude. "I feel the same," she replied. "Meeting you has been unexpected but wonderful. I'm grateful for it." As she walked home, she reflected on the day, the music, the laughter, the quiet moments of understanding, and the subtle ways their connection had deepened. She felt hopeful, curious, and quietly certain that this was only the beginning. Music had brought them together, yes, but it was honesty, care, and shared understanding that had created something far more meaningful. Sitting at home that evening, she thought about the melodies she had played, the way his presence had influenced her, and the small details that had made the day special. Connection didn't always need dramatic gestures. It could grow slowly, naturally, like a melody unfolding, each note building on the last to create something beautiful, lasting, and real. And in that quiet reflection, she allowed herself to imagine the possibilities of what could come next. The bond they were building was rare, delicate, and profound, and she felt ready to embrace it fully, letting music, conversation, and shared moments guide them forward. The day arrived with a quiet anticipation that felt almost tangible. She walked to the cafe with a mix of excitement and calm, a sense that something important was about to unfold. The previous meetings had been filled with music, conversation, and subtle connection, each encounter deepening the bond between them. Today felt different. It was the moment when the trust, understanding, and quiet intimacy they had built would find its full expression. He was already there when she arrived, sitting near the piano with a warm, expectant smile. The moment their eyes met, a small thrill ran through her chest. It was not nervousness this time, but a comforting certainty, a feeling that they had both come far enough along this journey to truly understand and appreciate each other. "Hi," he said softly, standing as she approached. "I'm glad you came." "Hi," she replied, smiling, feeling the familiar warmth of being seen. "I've been looking forward to today." They sat together and began with casual conversation, but it quickly moved into something deeper. They spoke of dreams, hopes, and the small joys that had shaped them. There was no need for pretension or awkwardness. The words flowed naturally, each sentence carrying sincerity, curiosity, and a quiet understanding. After a while, he gestured toward the piano. "Would you like to play?" he asked softly. "If you feel like it." She nodded, moving toward the piano with a gentle confidence. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and let the familiar sensation calm her. Music had been the language that brought them together, the bridge between two hearts that had not yet met before the first encounter. Today she wanted to play not just with skill, but with the deepest emotions she had felt over their time together. The first notes were soft, almost hesitant, but as she played, the melody began to swell with warmth, hope, and tenderness. Each chord seemed to carry a piece of her heart, and each note spoke of trust, joy, and a quiet longing that had developed over the past meetings. She noticed his eyes watching, absorbing not just the sound but the emotions behind it. His gaze held admiration, attentiveness, and a vulnerability that matched the honesty she poured into her music. He leaned forward slightly, his expression softening as the music continued. There was a subtle sense that the world had shrunk to this single room, the piano and the connection unfolding between them. Each phrase, each gentle rise and fall of the melody, seemed to tell a story of curiosity, discovery, and the quiet building of something rare and meaningful. As the music flowed, she allowed herself to play freely, without concern for perfection or structure. She played from her heart, letting the emotions of hope, trust, and growing affection guide her fingers. She realized that the music was no longer just hers or his, it was theirs, a shared experience that transcended words. When the final note lingered in the air, the cafe seemed to pause for a moment as if the music had held its breath. He remained still, taking in the sound, and then spoke softly. That was incredible. I can feel every emotion behind it. It's like you've shared a part of yourself that's rare and beautiful. I don't think I've ever felt something like this before." Her chest swelled with warmth and her eyes glistened slightly. "I just play what I feel," she said quietly. "I'm glad it reaches you." "It reaches me more than you can imagine," he replied. "And I think this connection, this bond, it's something extraordinary. I want to explore it with you, fully, honestly, without hesitation." She smiled softly, feeling a mixture of joy, relief, and anticipation. "I feel the same," she said. What we have. It's rare, and I want to see where it leads to." They continued to talk, sharing thoughts and feelings that went beyond the surface, delving into hopes for the future, personal reflections, and the kind of vulnerability that only comes from trust. She discovered more about him, the dreams he had quietly nurtured, the fears he had faced, and the simple things that brought him joy. He in turn noticed her subtleties, the way her hands moved when she was excited, the softness in her voice when she shared something meaningful, and the warmth in her eyes that spoke of sincerity and curiosity. At one point he paused, his gaze steady and earnest. "I didn't expect a blind date to lead to this," he admitted softly. "I thought it would be just a casual meeting, maybe awkward, maybe forgettable. But with you, it's changed everything. I feel complete in a way I didn't know was possible." Her heart lifted and she felt a rush of emotion. "I feel the same," she replied softly. "Meeting you, spending time with you, sharing music and conversation, it's opened something in me I didn't know existed. I'm grateful for it." The afternoon turned into evening and the cafe grew quieter. The soft glow of the lights added warmth to the room, and the piano seemed to wait patiently for her next song. She sat down once more, feeling the familiar comfort of the keys beneath her fingers. This time, the music she played was more than just emotion. It was a declaration, a promise, a reflection of the deep connection that had blossomed between them. The melody was tender, flowing and intimate, filled with a quiet joy and hope for the future. She played with a confidence that came from trust, knowing that the music would reach him in the way she intended. He listened, completely absorbed, his eyes reflecting the emotions that the melody carried. There was no need for words. The music itself spoke of care, admiration, and the unspoken bond that had formed between them. When she finished, he remained silent for a moment, letting the last note linger. Then he spoke softly, his voice filled with emotion. "That was beautiful. It's like I can feel everything you've been feeling over these past meetings. It's honest, raw, and incredibly moving. You've shared a part of yourself with me that I will never forget." Tears threatened to spill from her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of connection and understanding. "I'm glad it reached you," she said softly. "It comes from a place that's real, and I'm happy it speaks to you." "It does," he replied, taking her hand gently. "More than anything I could have imagined, I feel so connected to you, and I want to keep exploring this, us. I want to see where it leads together." Her heart soared at his words. She felt a quiet certainty, a deep knowing that the bond they had formed was genuine and strong. "I want that too," she said softly. "I've never felt this way before, but I know it's real, and I want to see it grow." They sat together in quiet reflection for a while, holding hands and savoring the moment. The cafe, the piano, and the gentle hum of the city outside all faded into the background. There was only the connection between them, the trust, the music, and the shared understanding that had brought them to this moment. As the evening progressed, they continued to talk, sharing hopes, dreams, and the subtle vulnerabilities that had formed the foundation of their bond. She noticed the gentle care in his tone, the thoughtful way he listened, and the quiet admiration that shone in his eyes. It made her feel cherished, understood, and valued in a way she had never experienced before. At one point, he spoke softly, his voice filled with sincerity. "I feel like I've known you far longer than these few meetings. There's a depth here that's rare, and I want to honor it. I want to be honest, open, and fully present with you because you deserve nothing less." Tears of joy spilled down her cheeks, and she smiled through them, feeling the warmth of his words in her heart. "I feel the same," she said softly. "I want to be fully present with you too. I want to share this journey honestly and openly and see where it takes us." The cafe had grown quiet, and they decided to take a short walk outside. The night air was cool and refreshing, carrying the faint scent of flowers and the distant sounds of the city. They walked side by side, holding hands, letting the quiet presence of the other speak volumes. Every glance, every touch, every small gesture carried meaning, reinforcing the connection they had spent weeks building. They stopped under a softly lit street lamp, and he turned to her with a gentle smile. "I've never felt this way before," he admitted softly. "The music, the conversations, the laughter. It's all created something I didn't expect. I feel complete with you, and I want to continue this together." She smiled, her heart full. "I feel the same," she said softly. "You've brought something into my life that I didn't know was missing, and I want to see where this goes, with honesty, trust, and care." They stood together under the street lamp, holding hands and savoring the quiet intimacy of the moment. It wasn't dramatic or rushed. It was simple, real, and profoundly meaningful. The bond they had formed over music, conversation, and shared understanding had grown into something rare and beautiful. As they walked back, they talked softly about the future, not in grand plans, but in hopes, dreams, and the small steps they wanted to take together. Each word, each gesture, each smile strengthened the trust and love that had quietly blossomed between them. When it was finally time to part for the night, he gently took her hands in his, looking deeply into her eyes. "Thank you," he said softly. "Not just for the music, but for being yourself. For sharing your heart. I feel incredibly lucky to have met you." She smiled, her chest warm with emotion. "I feel the same," she replied. "Meeting you has been unexpected but wonderful. I'm grateful for it, and I want to continue this journey together." As she walked home, she reflected on the past weeks, the music, the laughter, the quiet moments of understanding, and the bond that had grown steadily and meaningfully. She realized that connection didn't need grand gestures or dramatic declarations. It could grow naturally through trust, empathy, shared experiences, and the honesty of hearts meeting and understanding. She knew quietly but confidently that this was only the beginning. Music had brought them together, but it was honesty, care, and shared understanding that had created something far more meaningful. And with that knowledge, she allowed herself to feel hope, joy, and anticipation for the future, ready to embrace every moment, every melody,